and I wanted somebody to share that and enjoy it with he or she all together, you know? And I also found that at a certain point,
Few living filmmakers embody the spirit of cinema quite like Martin Scorsese. At 82, he remains both student and master, still watching, still learning, still urging the world to protect its film heritage. From the streets of mean streets to the epic scale of Killers of the Flower Moon, his own stories have changed how generations see the screen. Yet long before the Oscars and the accolades, Scorsese was a frail boy in Little Italy, glued to a small television set, discovering the films that would define his life. Those early screenings, often foreign, subtitled, and imperfectly dubbed, taught him that cinema could be truth, not just entertainment. Over the decades, he's spoken with reverence about the movies that shaped him, films that taught him about faith, obsession, history, and humanity itself. Today, we count down 7 films that Scorsese himself has named as his favorites, works that reflect not just his taste, but his soul. Number 7. Bicycle Thieves, 1948. Before Martin Scorsese became one of the most respected directors in the world, he was just a quiet boy in New York's Little Italy, a kid often kept indoors because of asthma. While other children played outside, he stayed in, mesmerized by the glow of a television set that flickered with films from across the ocean. Among them was a small black and white picture from post-war Italy that would change his life forever: Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves. Scorsese first saw it in the late 1940s, long before he understood words like neorealism or cinematic movement. What he felt instead was recognition. The film told the story of a poor man and his son searching the streets of Rome for a stolen bicycle. The father's only means of keeping his job. There were no glamorous stars, no polished sets, just ordinary faces full of struggle and dignity. For Scorsese, who grew up in a family of working-class Sicilian immigrants, it was like seeing his own relatives on screen. He later said that films like Bicycle Thieves were more than cinema. They were a form of truth. They meant more to me emotionally and psychologically than anything else. The impact went far beyond admiration. It shaped the foundation of his storytelling. De Sica's compassion for ordinary people taught Scorsese that drama could exist in the smallest details. A glance, a silence, a man's pride breaking under the weight of poverty. When he made Mean Streets decades later, filling it with hustlers, priests, and dreamers, he was channeling that same human honesty. He wasn't filming movie characters, he was filming life. What struck him most was the ending. After a desperate search, the father, humiliated and out of options, tries to steal another man's bike in front of his son. Caught and shamed, he breaks down. The boy takes his hand as they walk away into a sea of strangers. That simple gesture, forgiveness without words, haunted Scorsese for years. It's not just about losing a bicycle, he once reflected. It's about losing hope and still going on. That blend of despair and endurance would echo throughout his career, from Taxi Driver to Raging Bull to Silence. In every broken soul he filmed, there's a trace of that father and son walking home through Rome. Technically, Bicycle Thieves also revealed what filmmaking could do with almost nothing. Shot on location with non-professional actors, it made the city itself a character, something Scorsese would later replicate on the streets of New York. It proved that authenticity could be more powerful than spectacle. "This film is why I make movies," he admitted. "It showed me that the small things, a look, a gesture, a silence, could be everything." For Scorsese, Bicycle Thieves remains a touchstone, a reminder that cinema's greatest strength lies not in its grandeur, but in its honesty. Through De Sica, he learned that the truest art comes from compassion, and that even in defeat, humanity endures. Have films from other cultures ever made you see your own life differently? Which international movie has moved you the most? Number 6, Citizen Kane, 1941. When Martin Scorsese first saw Citizen Kane, he was already obsessed with the mechanics of film. He studied how light hit the frame, how a camera moved through a room. Yet Orson Welles' debut didn't simply impress him, it stunned him. It made him realize that cinema could reinvent itself in a single stroke. Orson Welles wiped the slate clean with Citizen Kane. Scorsese once said, "It's the greatest risk-taking of all time in film." Even today, the photography and narrative techniques still shock audiences. For Scorsese, Citizen Kane was more than a classic. It was a revolution. Released in 1941, it told the life story of newspaper tycoon Charles Foster Kane through fractured memories, flashbacks, and shifting perspectives.
As Charles Foster Kane, who owns 82,364 shares of public transit preferred, you see, I do have a general idea of my holdings.
At a time when most movies followed straight lines, Welles shattered chronology and built an emotional puzzle instead. Scorsese saw in it the boldness he would later emulate, the courage to experiment, to challenge the rules of storytelling. As a young filmmaker at NYU, he watched Kane again and again, studying how Welles used shadows to create depth, how deep-focused cinematography made every inch of the screen alive. Cinematographer Greg Toland's work became a Bible for Scorsese, who would later collaborate with Michael Ballhaus and Rodrigo Prieto to push visual boundaries in his own films. He once joked that Kane taught him more about directing than film school ever could. It wasn't about tricks, it was about vision. But what truly captivated Scorsese wasn't the technical perfection, it was the tragedy. The story of Kane, a man who gains everything and ends up with nothing, felt deeply human. Behind the grandeur of mansions and headlines, Scorsese saw loneliness, a man surrounded by power yet crushed by isolation. That theme of moral emptiness would echo through Scorsese's own work, from The Wolf of Wall Street to Raging Bull. Both directors understood the same truth, that success without soul leads only to ruin. Scorsese also admired the audacity of Welles himself, a 25-year-old who defied studios, fought executives, and made a masterpiece that almost destroyed his career. That defiance inspired Scorsese decades later when he battled censors over The Last Temptation of Christ and financiers over Silence. To him, Citizen Kane was a reminder that real art demands sacrifice. Welles risked everything, Scorsese reflected, and in doing so, he gave us a new language for film. Even now, Kane remains a benchmark in Scorsese's mind. Whenever he teaches young directors or introduces films through his preservation projects, he points back to it, to the energy of reinvention. He often says that Kane still feels fresh because true innovation never ages. It's why, 80 years later, the whisper of Rosebud still lingers. Not as a mystery, but as a warning. Do you agree that Citizen Kane deserves its reputation as one of the greatest films ever made? Why do you think its story still resonates after more than 80 years? Number 5, 8½, 1963. When Martin Scorsese speaks about 8½, his tone softens. It's the voice of a pilgrim remembering a sacred place. Federico Fellini's semi-autobiographical masterpiece struck him not only as a movie, but as a confession. An artist exposing his own confusion and wonder. Scorsese has called 8½ the purest expression of love for the cinema that I know. That line tells you everything. For him, Fellini didn't just make a film, he built a mirror where every director could see himself. The story follows Guido Anselmi, a filmmaker who has run out of ideas. Surrounded by producers, lovers, priests, and memories, he drifts between fantasy and reality while trying to create his next movie. When Scorsese first saw it in the early 60s, he was a young student wrestling with the same question: what kind of artist did he want to be? Fellini's answer, that imagination and truth can coexist, felt liberating. The traffic jam dream at the beginning, where Guido escapes his car and floats into the sky, showed Scorsese that cinema could move between the physical and the spiritual in a single cut. Technically, 8½ was a revelation. Its fluid camera, Nino Rota's swirling score, and the interplay of light and shadow all suggested that filmmaking was not just craft, but rhythm, a kind of music. Scorsese studied how Fellini choreographed chaos, filling the frame with faces, laughter, smoke, and movement, yet keeping every emotion precise. That orchestration would later echo through Scorsese's own ensembles, from Goodfellas to The Irishman, where the crowd becomes a single pulse. But beyond style, 8.5 spoke to him on a spiritual level. Guido's creative paralysis mirrored Scorsese's own anxieties about faith and purpose. Raised in a Catholic household, he often felt torn between sacred duty and artistic obsession. Watching Guido stumble through self-doubt and temptation, he recognized that same conflict. "Fellini gave me permission to be personal," he later said. "He showed me that confusion and doubt could themselves be the subject of art." It's no coincidence that Raging Bull and Silence both explore men trapped between guilt and grace, descendants of Guido's restless soul. Scorsese also loved how Fellini turned filmmaking itself into myth. Guido's movie set, with its half-built spaceship and endless rehearsals, becomes a metaphor for the human mind. Unfinished, chaotic, but striving for transcendence. For Scorsese, that was the ultimate truth about cinema. It's never complete. It's always searching. He often tells young directors to watch 8.5 when they lose confidence. "Every artist hits that wall," he says. "Fellini showed us how to climb it, with imagination." Even now, Scorsese keeps returning to 8.5 for reassurance. It reminds him that creation isn't about certainty, but surrender. He once joked that every time he steps onto a set, Guido's ghost is already there, whispering, "Just start. Something beautiful will happen." To him, Fellini's dreamlike odyssey is both a caution and a blessing. That art is pain, chaos, and ecstasy, all rolled into one long take. Have you ever felt creatively stuck like Guido in 8.5? What helps you break through when inspiration disappears? Number 4. The Searchers, 1956. When Martin Scorsese talks about John Ford's The Searchers, there's always a trace of reverence in his voice. It's not just admiration, it's awe. He calls it a film that haunts and troubles me, one he returns to again and again. Set against the vast deserts of Monument Valley, The Searchers is both a western and an elegy. A story of obsession, vengeance, and impossible redemption. Scorsese listed among his 10 greatest films of all time, but the reasons go far beyond genre or craft. For him, this is a film about the darkness that hides within devotion. At its heart stands Ethan Edwards, played by John Wayne, a Confederate veteran who spends years searching for his kidnapped niece.
Well, Reverend, that tears it. No, and you stay out of this. All of you. I don't want you with me.
On the surface, it's a simple rescue story. Yet the more Ethan searches, the more the line between justice and hatred blurs. Scorsese calls Wayne's performance the greatest performance of a great American actor, precisely because it reveals contradiction. Ethan is heroic and hateful, noble and cruel, the kind of complex figure that would later populate Scorsese's own films. In Taxi Driver's Travis Bickle or Raging Bull's Jake LaMotta, you can feel Ethan's ghost. Men consumed by purpose until it poisons them. What captivated Scorsese most was the film's tone, both majestic and unsettling. Ford's camera captured beauty and brutality in the same frame. The endless horizon wasn't freedom, it was emptiness. The Searchers, Scorsese once said, is a film that gets under your skin because it refuses to comfort you. It asks us to question our myths. The Western had always been America's bedtime story, cowboys and justice under an open sky, but Ford exposed its moral cost. For Scorsese, who grew up loving movies that romanticized violence, this revelation was pivotal. It taught him that cinema could interrogate itself, could pull apart its own myths while still honoring their power. As a filmmaker, Scorsese also admired Ford's visual storytelling. Every shot in The Searchers carries meaning. The doorways that frame Ethan in shadow, the vast landscapes that dwarf human ambition, the final image of Wayne standing alone, cut off from the family he saved but can never join. That last shot, Scorsese says, is one of the most perfect endings in all of cinema. It closes with a door shutting between civilization and the man who can't belong to it. A moment of visual poetry that influenced Scorsese's endings for Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, and The Irishman. Each of his films ends on a similar note. A man alone, watching the world move on without him. More than 60 years later, The Searcher still follows Scorsese like a shadow. It reminds him that storytelling is not about heroes or villains, but about understanding why people do what they do, even when it hurts to look. For him, Ford's masterpiece remains the ultimate lesson, that the search never ends, because what we're truly hunting is ourselves. Ethan Edwards is both courageous and cruel. Do you think films should explore such deeply flawed heroes, or should cinema offer clearer morality? Number 3. Vertigo, 1958. When Martin Scorsese speaks of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, his voice turns contemplative, almost hushed, as if he's recalling a private dream. He calls it a singular work that stands alone. The hero is driven purely by obsession, and that strikes a deep chord with me. For Scorsese, Vertigo isn't just a thriller about love and illusion. It's a confession about the human need to remake the past, no matter the cost. He first saw the film as a young man in the early 1960s, long before it was widely recognized as Hitchcock's masterpiece. The story of a retired detective, Scotty Ferguson, who becomes obsessed with a woman he believes is possessed by a ghost, resonated with Scorsese's fascination with guilt, identity, and the power of fixation. Scotty's descent into obsession, his desperate attempt to control what he cannot understand, mirrored the kind of characters Scorsese would later explore. Travis Bickle, Jake LaMotta, Rupert Pupkin, all of them men consumed by a vision of perfection that reality refuses to give them. What struck Scorsese most was the film's emotional daring. Hitchcock turned romance into nightmare, passion into punishment. The spiraling camera moves, the swirling colors, Bernard Herrmann's score, all combined into a hypnotic portrait of longing and madness. To Scorsese, it was cinema not as storytelling, but as psychological trance. He admired how Hitchcock externalized inner turmoil, the dizzying dolly zoom that visualized fear of falling, the endless circles that symbolized obsession. These weren't tricks, they were metaphors, visual prayers for something lost. Scorsese also saw himself in Hitchcock's relentless precision. Vertigo was built from control, every frame deliberate, yet beneath that control was chaos. It's a film about illusion, Scorsese once explained, and about the terror of not being able to separate illusion from love. That theme, the confusion between devotion and destruction, would echo through Scorsese's own work. In the age of innocence and casino, passion burns so brightly it blinds. Like Hitchcock, he understood that desire can be both sacred and fatal. When Vertigo was re-released in the 1980s, Scorsese championed its restoration. He called it a lesson in how cinema remembers what we forget. For him, the film's haunting power lay in its honesty about obsession. We pursue perfection not because it saves us, but because it defines us. Watching Scotty recreate the woman he's lost, Scorsese saw the artist's curse, the urge to rebuild a vanished moment, frame by frame, even when it destroys you. Today, Vertigo still lives inside Scorsese's visual language. The dizzying camera movements, the Catholic guilt, the loneliness that follows beauty. It taught him that art is not about resolution, but reckoning. That the most haunting films never really end. They linger, circling endlessly in our minds, just like Hitchcock's spiraling titles that fade into the void. Do you think Hitchcock wanted us to pity Scotty's obsession or to fear it? How does Vertigo make you feel about love and control? Number 2, The Red Shoes, 1948. Few films have captured Martin Scorsese's imagination like Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's The Red Shoes. He's called it one of the very greatest films ever made, a movie that reveals something new every time he watches it. For Scorsese, this dazzling Technicolor ballet isn't just about dance. It's about the fever of creation, the cost of obsession, and the fragile line between life and art. He first saw it as a teenager, drawn in by its lush color and haunting score. The story of Vicky Page, a ballerina torn between love and her consuming passion to perform, struck him as painfully familiar. Scorsese understood that intensity, the way art can devour the artist. Every time I watch The Red Shoes, he said, it reveals another side. There's no other picture that visualizes the overwhelming obsession of art like this one. To Scorsese, Powell and Pressburger transformed cinema into movement itself. The 17-minute ballet sequence, where Vicky's performance becomes a surreal descent into fantasy, showed him that film could escape realism altogether. It wasn't just storytelling, it was music and color turned into emotion. He often cited this sequence as a direct influence on his own use of rhythm and camera motion in Raging Bull and Goodfellas. Yet beneath the beauty, Scorsese sensed tragedy. Vicky's final fall onto the railway tracks is not merely death. It's the price of devotion.
Yes, my darling.
Take off the red shoes.
The film warned him that passion is both gift and curse. It's about giving yourself completely to art, he once said, and realizing that art might not give itself back. That haunting truth echoes through Scorsese's entire career. His films are filled with characters chasing transcendence. Gangsters, boxers, monks, all dancing on the same knife's edge between purpose and destruction. The Red Shoes also awakened Scorsese's lifelong admiration for Powell himself, whom he later befriended. He helped restore Powell's films, ensuring their survival for future generations. In a sense, his preservation work became his way of repaying a spiritual debt. Decades later, Scorsese still shows The Red Shoes to young filmmakers, calling it the ultimate lesson in cinematic passion. For him, it remains proof that film can be as expressive as a symphony, as heartbreaking as life itself. Have you ever felt torn between following your passion and protecting your personal life like Vicky Page? Which side would you choose? Number 1. The Leopard, 1963. When Martin Scorsese names his number 1 favorite film, his voice takes on a special gravity. Luchino Visconti's The Leopard is, to him, not just cinema, but time itself captured on celluloid. He calls it a meditation on eternity and time and the changes we go through, presented on a cosmic scale. It's become more and more important to me as the years go by. Scorsese first encountered The Leopard in the early 60s while studying film history. Visconti's grand adaptation of Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa's novel stunned him. The story of Prince Fabrizio Salina, an aging Sicilian aristocrat watching his world fade as revolution reshapes Italy.
Solamente esseri umani, in un mondo in piena trasformazione. Che dovremmo fare?
The film's vast canvases, from crumbling estates to candlelit ballrooms, reminded Scorsese that cinema could paint with history itself. He saw in Fabrizio a reflection of all artists, aware of change yet powerless to stop it. That melancholy became one of Scorsese's lifelong themes. The passing of eras, the bittersweet dignity of letting go. He often says The Leopard taught him how to watch time unfold. Visconti lingered on gestures, glances, the slow turning of seasons. Rather than rush the story, he allowed viewers to feel the rhythm of history, to understand that transformation is both beautiful and cruel. Scorsese absorbed this lesson deeply. It echoes in the elegiac pacing of The Irishman and the reflective tone of Killers of the Flower Moon. Through Visconti, he learned that endings are never abrupt. They drift in quietly like twilight. The film's famous ballroom sequence, nearly 30 minutes of candlelight, silk, and slow dancing, remains for Scorsese one of cinema's purest expressions of time. He often shows it to his students, urging them to notice how the scene breathes, how every movement tells the story of an era fading. For him, this wasn't indulgence, it was truth. The richness of The Leopard, he said, deepens with every viewing. It's life and death on a cosmic scale. Burt Lancaster's performance as Prince Fabrizio also moved Scorsese deeply. A man of intellect trapped by tradition, Fabrizio accepts that his world must end so another can begin. That resignation, that grace in defeat, is what Scorsese calls the heart of art itself. The Leopard isn't about revolution, it's about acceptance. Even now, Scorsese returns to it when reflecting on his own life and career. After decades of filmmaking, he too understands Fabrizio's gaze. Calm, wistful, watching the dance continue without him. Through Visconti, he learned that cinema, like history, never stops. It only changes partners. Visconti's ballroom sequence lasts nearly half an hour. Do long, immersive scenes pull you deeper into a story, or do they test your patience? At 82, Martin Scorsese's voice still trembles with excitement when he talks about movies. For him, cinema has never been a career. It's a calling, a way of understanding the world. His 7 favorite films aren't trophies on a list. They're fragments of his soul. From the quiet heartbreak of Bicycle Thieves to the grand melancholy of The Leopard, each film taught him something about truth, time, and the cost of beauty. Together they form a map of his artistic DNA. Scorsese's life has been one long dialogue with these masterpieces. Wells taught him courage. Fellini showed him vulnerability. Hitchcock revealed the darkness of desire. Ford gave him myth and morality. Powell gave him passion. Visconti gave him grace. And De Sica reminded him where he came from, the humble streets that shaped his humanity. Every frame he's ever shot echoes these lessons. Even now, when he introduces restored classics or mentors young filmmakers, Scorsese speaks as a student, not a master. He says the movies that move us most never grow old. They just change meaning as we do. That belief drives his relentless mission to preserve film history through the Film Foundation, ensuring that future generations can feel the same awe he felt as a boy in a darkened theater. So now the question passes to you. Which of Scorsese's 7 favorites speaks to your soul? And which film first made you fall in love with the art of storytelling? Share your answer below, and remember, as Scorsese has shown us for 60 years, the greatest movie we'll ever watch is life itself.